Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to tonight's City Council meeting, Committee of the Whole meeting, and Special Committee of the Whole meeting. The microphones are on and the cameras are rolling. I kindly ask our city clerk to please take the roll.
Right. Bowering?
Here.
Bruno?
Here.
Ruby? Here. Kilberg?
Here.
Kasserag?
Here.
Maladra?
Here.
Marks?
Here.
Mayor?
Here.
Paschke? Swanson?
Here. And Alderperson Patchke did notify us that she'll be vacationing today. So, with that, we begin our council meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. We would like to ask our new best friend in the whole wide world, Nick Partapillo, to please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fairly light council meeting, but first up is item 3A, is the introduction of Administrative Analyst Nick Partapillo. Nick, join us at the podium, man. How are you?
Doing well, yourself?
Good. I've got a cheat sheet on you, and I want to thank you very much for phonetically pronouncing your last name.
I said it's scarier than it looks. It's pretty
It
easy,
is.
all things considered.
Middle name, Jacob. We discussed this earlier.
Yep.
And your family is from, is it Bari?
Barty.
Bari, Italy.
Yep. Back on the heel.
Back on the heel. Isn't that wild? Mm-hmm. Your grandfather came over
Correct.
when he was about 1 year old. Isn't that something? But you have not yet been to Italy.
Not yet. One day.
Not yet.
Once I've accrued some vacation time.
The money you're making here, man, not a problem.
Yep.
Born and raised in beautiful Lilac Village of Lombard.
That's correct.
Good Lord. Glenbard East, track, wrestling, musical ensemble, slam poetry, and speech.
Yep.
I think just the phrase slam poetry means you're a young man.
That's what they tell me.
Is that right?
Yep.
So, did you win any awards in slam poetry?
Well, I don't want to brag, but the year that I was the captain of the slam poetry team, we actually did make it to a competition called Louder Than a Bomb. There was a big documentary on it that circulated in the early
there is
2010s.
not.
Yes, there was. And we, with myself as the anchor for our team, we actually made it to the semifinals for nationally. We were downtown at, is it Columbia that's downtown?
Yes.
At Columbia, it's obviously a big art school. They hosted this competition, and there were slam poetry teams from all across Illinois there. Some people famous in the slam poetry world were there.
Well,
It was
don't even share the names. We know them.
That's okay.
Who's the most famous slam poet?
Adam Lambert would be his name.
Not the singer.
Not that singer, no, different Adam Lambert. This one's hippie, long hair, the whole shebang. Looks like a guy who does poetry for a living.
And you mean that as a compliment?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, of course. So, can we look up this documentary?
I'm sure if you look up Louder Than a Bomb, I'm pretty sure there was a book about it. I'm sure you can see video recordings of people competing, doing all their slam poetry. There's a great gag about it in 22 Jump Street. If you ever saw the remakes from a couple years ago, they do a great spoof of slam poetry that's scarily accurate.
Ben, where do we find this guy, man? Is it a slam poetry contest? This is awesome, man. We gotta have Kevin Starr interview you. You can slam your answers.
I'll do what I can. I'll make sure to keep it appropriate.
I know. And speech, competitive speech. Mm-hmm. And how did you do in speech?
I did all right.
Yeah?
Speech was kind of my last hurrah, something new to do in high school. I only did that my senior year, so.
Yeah.
But I kind of knew what I was trying to do in college, and I figured some good speech practice would be helpful for me in political science.
Heck yeah. Off to NIU, majored in political science, and you were the head drum major for the marching band.
That's correct.
Drum major, track star, wrestling star, musical ensemble. So you've got a singing voice too.
A little bit.
Did you sing at NIU?
No, I was more marching band, pep band, wind symphony. I did choir in high school, but didn't have time to try to manage that in college as well.
So as head drum major, what's that all about? What's your responsibility?
You run the band. Of
Literally.
course, we had a tenured professor who was the director of bands, but I would run the rehearsals. I would manage the conflicts when people were complaining that, well, now they're on their field standing next to their ex-girlfriend. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I had to resolve that. I would go,
Sounds like a poetry thing.
yes,
Sounds-
manage open house, recruit high schoolers, talk to parents, tell them, don't worry, we're going to give your kids some money to come do marching band, that sort of thing. So I played trumpet my first 2 years, auditioned to be drum major, and was that my junior and senior year.
Is that right? Competitive interview, I would assume.
Yes, to brag a little bit, I was the first non-music major drum major in over 15 years for the marching band, so,
First non-music major, drum major.
correct.
Really?
It's often music majors.
Is there a statue of you in DeKalb, or?
No, I did try to get an honorary music minor for the amount of time I dedicated to NIU School of Music, but the dean wasn't hearing any of it, so I tried.
Bummer, man. You've had 2 summer internships with then House Minority Leader Jim Durkin.
Correct.
How was that?
Fantastic. It was great to dip my foot into
That
the
was
realm
big.
of government.
Yeah, big time.
You know, I was in his office in Burr Ridge most of the time, but I'd help him down in Springfield occasionally. I got to be there on the floor with him, running bills, getting information. Writing bill analysis was my primary job function, but
is that
doing
right?
that, speaking with constituents, it was a very good internship. I'm very thankful for it to this day.
Your drum majoring experience helped in terms of, dare I say, orchestrating and navigating all that nonsense?
Navigating the political atmosphere, I would say so.
Wow. You have a master's in public administration from Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M.
That is correct.
How the heck did you end up there?
When I was looking for undergrads, I wanted to keep it close and affordable, so I settled on NIU. But when I was making the decision between law school and an MPA, I knew I wanted to go somewhere big and far away, and it's always bigger in Texas, and it's pretty far too. So
Yeah, it sure is.
landed on Texas A&M. One of my mentors said, NIU's MPA program is obviously fantastic,
Right.
but I wanted to differentiate myself, learn some skills that maybe they don't teach at NIU, and bring that knowledge back with me here. But he said, if you're going to go get an MPA, get it in a school that's named after a president. So I took that to heart.
Is that a 2-year program?
Was.
Was. And you lived on campus?
I did.
In the dorms?
In an apartment.
In an apartment, okay.
Found one that was fully furnished. I didn't really want to drive a couch 17 hours down to College Station, so one that had a couch
know.
and bed already was very helpful.
It says you were an intern in Lombard and worked for the Village of Western Springs. Now, it's written as interned in Lombard. I thought, you look damn good for being interned in Lombard. It's like,
Thank you.
oh, I'm sorry, that's... Avid, okay, if anyone knows what this is, chime in. Our friend Nick is an avid frolfer.
Correct.
Very good. Frisbee golf. I had never heard that phrase before. I just heard frisbee golf.
Frisbee golf's the technical term.
Lover of board games, and the biggest NIU, Texas A&M, and Chicago Bears fan on the planet.
That's me.
How were you inspired to frolf?
My friends like to do it, and it was a good excuse to be outside. You know, it's a beautiful summer afternoon. We're not sitting inside playing video games, but actually go out, walk the course, be outside, play. It's pretty relatively cheap. You buy a $15 disc, and you're pretty much good to go.
And those discs are weighted in some way, too. You can,
Yeah, same way as a golf disc is. You know, I can come up and I'll pull out my driver on the approach, and then as I get closer, I'll switch to a mid-range or a putter, and those are weighted differently. The flight pattern's different on different drivers, depending on your throw patterns. It's a real game.
How many discs do you carry with you?
I only carry 4.
Are you allowed to carry like golf, like 13?
Oh, there's people with suitcases that they lug around the course with 50 discs in them. I just have a little drawstring backpack to fit that in a water bottle, and that's about
Have you
it.
played the Wheeler Park course?
I have not, but I do know there's a course out here that I'm going
Yeah.
to try on one of the weekends.
Up the road by what, 6 blocks? Yeah. Well, that's cool. Well, happy frolfing.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's hard to say. Chicago Bears, where are they going?
Well, now I hear Aurora's trying to take a stab at it too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard Maple Park.
Oh, okay. As long as they go up in the win column, that's about all I really care about.
Who's your favorite player of all time?
Probably Urlacher. Yeah, probably Urlacher. I grew up right in that era. I got to meet him when I was a kid. I'd say him and Hester, probably my tied two.
Devin Hester, the kick returner,
That's the one.
number 23?
The greatest of all time.
So you sit downstairs, and when people walk in, you are the first one they see.
That's why I wear a shirt and tie every day.
You do wear a shirt and tie every day. It's pretty impressive, man.
Just in my old job, I'd be out throwing on the steel-toe boots, inspecting sanitary lines for people and cleaning off storm inlets. So when I have the opportunity to wear a shirt and tie, now I'm taking it.
Oh, good for you. So far, so good? Enjoying your success? No, yeah, notice. Yeah.
You know where to find me if you need
Care to
me.
make any comments from Public Works? Anybody? No? So far, so good, though, Nick?
So far, so great.
Yeah? Brothers, sisters?
Nope, just me.
Just you, man. That's cool. Your middle name, Jacob, is your mom's maiden name.
Correct.
What else should we know about you? Or what else do you want to share with us, I should say?
Just moved to DeKalb a couple of months ago.
Oh, you did?
Moved in with my girlfriend. That was one of the big reasons I was trying to find a job closer to home.
Yeah.
And this is, I know to some people a 40-minute drive is a lot, but I was prepared to do an hour each way and 65 miles each way, so 40 minutes and 25 miles is easy as far as I'm concerned.
Just come down Roosevelt or
Straight
38?
shot.
Yeah, straight shot. So you live right downtown DeKalb?
A little further west, we're pretty removed from
Yeah.
DeKalb and the campus at this point. We're tucked
that
away
stuff.
in kind of a new development west of Annie Glidden, but it's a
Oh,
couple
sure.
turns and then I'm on 38 and it's straight away.
Oh, that's nice, man. Well, the floor is open. Any members of the council, any questions or comments for Nick? And you prefer Nick?
Whatever's easiest. Nicholas is what my mom calls me when she's upset, so usually it's Nick.
Nicholas it is.
Okay.
Well, we're delighted you're with us.
Thank you for
What
having
an
me.
impressive background, man.
Thank you.
So perhaps next year you can do a poetry slam or something? I want to see one of these poetry slams. So can I find you online?
Maybe?
Yes, you can.
Dad, I am not sure of that.
Do you have your own website?
I certainly do not have my own website.
But if
If
I
anything,
YouTube,
yeah, maybe Glenbard East put it up on YouTube from 10 years ago when we were competing.
Oh my God, 10 years ago. Whoa. Wow. Yeah, that was before technology.
Crazy, right? 2013, the Stone Age.
Literally the Stone Age. Well, again, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much for having
Thank you
me.
very much.
Appreciate
You're heading
it.
back tonight, right? Obviously.
Heading home?
We're not putting you up at the Harrington?
Ben? No, okay, then I'm going back home.
Good answer. Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Poetry slam. Make sure that makes the minutes.
It's gonna be in there.
Is that with the coffee stain?
Oh, that's even better.
Is Adam Lambert still living, Nick? The poetry guy?
I've been pretty far removed from the slam poetry game for a while now.
So the answer is you don't know?
I have no idea.
Wow. Pretty cool, man. Item 4, amendments to the agenda. Are there any amendments this evening? Item 5 is the omnibus agenda. All items marked with an asterisk are considered to be routine by this council, and those items can be considered adopted by one motion. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Alderperson Bruno makes the motion.
Second.
Alderperson Marks makes the second. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Bruno?
Aye.
Ruby? Aye. Kilberg?
Aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Maladra?
Aye.
Marks?
Aye.
Mayor?
Aye.
Swanson?
Aye.
Bowering?
Aye.
With a vote of 9 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 1 absent, the omnibus agenda has been approved by this council. We skip to item 10, municipal bills for payment. We kindly ask our clerk to read the bills in their aggregate and recommended by the city administrator.
Municipal bills for payment total $1,390,074.
Mayor, I move that we approve and pay the bills as read. The individual items that add up to that amount can be found in tonight's city council packet on the city website.
Alderperson Bruno makes the motion to pay the bills as presented, which are also included in each council member's packet and on the city's website. Is there a second? Seconded by Alderperson Bowering. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
All right. Bruno?
Aye.
Ruby? Aye. Kilberg?
Aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Maladra?
Aye.
Marks?
Aye.
Mayor?
Aye.
Swanson?
Aye.
Bowering?
Aye.
With a vote of 9 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 1 absent, the bills have been approved for payment. Jumping to item 12, presentation of ordinances and resolutions. Item 12A is consider approval of resolution number 2023-70, granting a final plat of re-subdivision for the Cooper Woods subdivision. Is there a motion? Alderperson Mayor, Alderperson Kasserag, and Ms. Dawkins.
Sure. So the Cooperwood subdivision was originally approved in 2016 for 21 total lots, which were zoned for single-family use. The proposed re-subdivision would reduce the total number of lots to the site to 19. At their June 22nd, 2023 meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously recommended approval of the applicant's request. We do have Director DeGroot with us this evening, if you have any questions, and the applicant is here as well. So,
From the dais, any questions for Director DeGroot or the applicant's attorney? Seeing none and sensing none, Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
All right. Mayor?
Aye.
Swanson?
Aye.
Bowring?
Aye.
Bruno?
Aye.
Ruby? Aye. Kilberg?
Aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Maladra?
Aye.
Marks?
Aye.
Item 12A has been approved with 9 affirmative votes, 0 nay votes, and 1 absent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Be safe. Item 12B, consider approval of Resolution 2023-71, waiving competitive bidding and authorize the purchase of and installation of a motor and pump for well number 13. Is there a motion? Alderperson Bowring? Seconded by Alderperson Kasserag. I sense a battle brewing over there. Ms.
have to
Dawkins?
separate those two. In April, there was a severe thunderstorm that caused a power outage at well number 13. Following the outage, the control system was unable to be reset. An evaluation determined that the motor failed due to a lightning strike, damaging the motor and required replacement. Due to the importance of restoring this well back into service as soon as possible, the recommendation is to waive competitive bidding and acquire the replacement pump and motor from Municipal Well and Pump. The city's insurance will reimburse the cost of the motor. It's my understanding we're still trying to see if they will cover the cost of the pump, but currently they are not. The new pump is required as the existing one is not compatible with the new motor. The expense will be made within the existing budget and reflected in a future budget amendment if necessary. And we do have Superintendent Van Gescam with us this evening for any questions.
Questions from the dais for the superintendent?
Yeah, I have one.
Alderperson Maladra?
Thank you. So, Bob, we're waiving competitive bidding so that we can get this as soon as possible. Can you just, for me, get me to understand, when do we expect it to come in this way, and what would we be looking at if we went through the bid process?
Sure. The motor is available right now, but the pump is 6 to 8 weeks lead time out. So if we advertised to go out to formal bid, that would be 2 weeks of advertising and then another 2 weeks to additional 4 weeks to 6 weeks to get it approved after that. So.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else from the dais? If not, we have a motion. We have a second. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Bowring?
Aye.
Bruno?
Aye.
Ruby? Aye. Kilberg?
Aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Maladra?
Aye.
Marks?
Aye.
Mayor?
Aye.
Swanson?
Aye.
Item 12B has been approved with a vote of 9 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 1 absent. Item 12C, consider approval of Resolution 2023-72, authorizing execution of fiscal year 2022-2023 budget amendments. Is there a motion? Alderperson Mayor? Second. And seconded by Alderperson Marks. Ms. Dawkins?
Okay, so there were several amendments in your packet. I'll just go over briefly the 6 funds. So we have the SPAC fund has a budget amendment for the DEI consultant and trees that were purchased by the Natural Resources Committee. Funds are provided through the fund balance. For the PEG fund, which is the Public Education and Governmental Channel Fund, unbudgeted costs for upgrading the video cable to high definition to provide better quality streaming of city meetings. This is also provided through the fund balance. Foreign Fire Fund for the purchase of rescue tools for Engine 202. Funds are provided through fund balance. SSA 16, which is Fisher Farms, for additional landscaping charges. Funds are provided through the fund balance. Police pension funds, transfer payouts of former employees' contributions, and for the firefighter pension fund, pension payments for unanticipated retirements. When I reference the fund balance, that is the fund balance in that respective fund. It's not all coming from one fund. So we do have Director Cruz with us this evening if you have any additional questions.
Questions from the dais for Director Cruz or the city administrator? Mayor, then Kosarog.
This is probably for Stephanie more than Rita, but was the high-definition cable already corrected or already installed?
Yes.
Okay, because I noticed the
Sorry,
streaming
yes.
quality is
Yeah,
is
so
a lot
these
better,
are all, just to clarify, that's a good question. These are all amendments for last fiscal year, so everything has been expended and installed as of, prior to April 30th.
actually. Okay, yeah, I noticed that the streaming quality has gone up quite a bit, so that's great.
Great.
Alderperson Kosarog, welcome back from your vacation.
To Scandinavia.
I know, and
Yeah.
all in honor of your soon-to-be milestone birthday.
Man, you got me pegged.
We're going to lower the flag for you.
I need it, yeah. That's appropriate. My question was just about the for firefighters foreign fund, or did I say that right?
Firefighters Pension Fund? Or the Foreign Fire, the Foreign Fire
Fighters
Fund.
Fund,
Yeah.
What is the source of those funds?
So the source of those funds are, is 2% of, I believe it's 2% of any insurance agency that's outside the state of Illinois is required to remit back to IML, and then IML remits out to all of the different entities, if it's a municipality or even a fire district. So they receive a little around $80,000 a year on an annual basis to fund any of these expenses.
And this is just all informational, nothing's wrong. So I just from reading packets and agendas, they decide pretty much how to spend that money.
Yes.
And so I guess I was just curious about, do they keep a balance or they're subject to our same?
Yeah, so when you say they decide, there is a board
Right.
that, so it's not IML, it's our board.
Yeah, that's what I
Okay,
meant.
yes.
Yeah, our
And so-
firefighters.
Right, and we, several years ago, required them to put it all through the city's accounting processes so that we could account for it and know when it came in and when it went out. Previous to that, I would say 5 years ago,
Maybe.
they used to just have a checkbook that was not part of the city's books.
That's what I kind of understood it to be. That's
that's-
why I was a little confused on the budget
Right,
amendment.
so,
for it.
so then, several years ago, we were streamlining and ensuring that we didn't have any of these accounts kind of hanging out there that nobody had any oversight of. Even though the city really doesn't have authority to say how to spend it, we at least can track, we get the money, and then we put it in that fund, and then they spend it.
And then there can be a balance, obviously.
Yeah,
because
yes.
that's what we're
Correct, and that
reappropriating
stays
here.
within that fund.
Okay. But they're not subject to that 25% rule?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason why they're on our on our software is because they are listed on our financial statements as well. So, like Stephanie said, it used to be on spreadsheets and a weird software, and we moved it over. So it's a lot easier for us to
And more
look at it.
professional, it sounds like, so.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Much more.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Mayor,
Aye.
Swanson,
Aye.
Bowering,
Aye.
Bruno,
Aye.
Ruby,
Aye.
Kilberg,
Aye.
Kosarog,
Aye.
Maladra,
Aye.
Marks.
Aye.
With a vote of 9 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 1 absent, item 12C has been approved by this council. Item 12D is to consider approval of Resolution 2023-73, declaring surplus and authorizing advertisement for sale, real property located at 617 East State Street. Is there a motion? Alderperson Bowering? Alderperson Mayor? Ms. Dawkins, please.
Okay, so the city-owned property at 617 East State Street is located in the East State Street Tax Increment Finance District. The city purchased the property in February of 2013 to stimulate economic growth of the East State Street corridor by assembling properties and/or working with investors to best develop potential commercial parcels. Shortly after the purchase, the city declared the house surplus and demolished it. The land was consistently marketed for sale, for assembly, or new development. What we've discovered in this process is that we never declared the actual land surplus, we only declared the house surplus that was on the land. So the next step is to declare the property surplus, authorize advertisement of sale, to provide opportunity for any and all interested parties to come forward and make an offer. And then a resolution is in your packet tonight authorizing such action. And then, once we get any offers, then those would come back to the city council for consideration.
Any questions from Ms. Dawkins?
Ms. Doc, I just have one. Aren't we already advertising it, or is it?
Yeah, we've
That's
been
what I thought.
advertising, but
Okay.
this is statutory advertising, so this means we actually have to put it in a newspaper and
Which means, are we accepting
then we would
bids?
be accepting bids
Oh, so it's a little different than just,
than just somebody making an offer, that is
that's
correct.
or with that sign out there with the real
Yeah,
estate
but we were
agent.
trying to generate interest because for so long it just kind of sat.
Do we expect maybe more interest with the Route 38 being
No,
completed?
I
Or do
mean,
you think it's just
I
landlocked
think,
in that?
yeah, I mean, your interest is gonna come probably from the adjoining property
Okay.
owners, because it is a small parcel, which is why we purchased it. If you know, along
Yeah,
East
I
State
remember
Street,
that.
all of the parcels are a bit smaller in size, so the idea was be able to combine a couple parcels.
Anyone else? Madam Clerk, whenever you're ready, please take the roll.
Bowering,
Aye.
Bruno,
Aye.
Ruby. Aye. Kilberg,
Aye.
Kussarog,
Aye.
Maladra,
Aye.
Marks,
Aye.
Mayor,
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
And for the record, I'd like to cast an aye vote as well.
Oh, okay.
I am permitted to vote on these matters, so thank you. With 10 affirmative, 0 negative, and 1 absent, item 12D has been approved. Item 12E is to consider approval of Resolution 2023-74, approving 4-year collective bargaining agreement between the City of Geneva and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 196, which of course are our distinguished and trusted Street and Fleet Division personnel.
So moved.
Kossarog offers the motion, Bowering offers the second. Ms. Dawkins with the summary.
Okay, so for your consideration this evening and approval is the successor collective bargaining agreement between the City of Geneva and the IBEW Local 196. The union members did ratify this contract on June 27th, 2023. The CBA is for 4 years. It would be retroactive to fiscal year 2023 and continues through fiscal year 26, and includes changes to wages, overtime eligibility, residency, dues deduction, fair share, standby and sick leave, probationary period, CDL training, and the annual clothing allowance and footwear allowance. Assistant City Administrator McCready was on that negotiating team and is happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for the Assistant City Administrator McCready. Alderperson Swanson.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a retroactive adjustment that we're going to be paying with the ratification of this?
Yes, there is.
And is that covered in the budget?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Kussarog,
Aye.
Maladra,
Aye.
Marks,
Aye.
Mayor,
Aye.
Swanson,
Aye.
Bowering,
Aye.
Bruno,
Aye.
Ruby. Aye. Kilberg.
Aye.
With a vote of 9 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 1 absent, item 12E has been approved by this council. We jump to item 13, public comment. Anyone joining us this evening for public comment for the benefit of the council and community? We invite you to the podium. New business from the dais. Any new business from any members of the city council? How about we entertain a motion to adjourn the city council meeting? Alderperson Marks makes the motion. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. The council meeting is adjourned. We'll take just a moment to transition for Alderperson Ruby to chair the committee of the whole meeting.
Good evening. My name is Becky Ruby. I'm the Third Ward Alderperson, along with Dean Kilberg. I will be the chair of tonight's Committee of the Whole meeting. The date is Monday, July 3rd. I'd like to welcome everyone to City Hall tonight. Let the record show that Alderperson Paschke is absent. Everyone else is in attendance this evening. First up on the agenda, item 2, recommend suspending the rules to permit Alderperson Ruby to chair this meeting and to vote on all action items on this agenda. Can I get a motion?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Swanson, seconded by Kussarog.
Voice vote.
Okay. Voice vote, please. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Okay. Item 3, approve Committee of the Whole minutes from June 19th, 2023.
So moved.
Moved by Bruno, seconded by Marks. Okay. Voice vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay. All right. Passes unanimously. All right. Items of business. Item 4A, Consider a resolution authorizing city administrator to purchase a Bobcat skid steer loader in an amount not to exceed $70,013. Okay, moved by Kosrak, seconded by Mayor, and,
Kilburg.
oh, sorry. And, Ms. Dawkins, do you have
Okay.
a?
Just a brief,
Summary?
yep. So the fiscal year '24 budget has funds allocated to replace the 2002 skid loader due to years in service and number of repairs made on an annual basis. This piece of equipment is used for road repairs, snow removal and loading, and site restoration work. The Bobcat skid loader from Atlas Bobcat through the Sourcewell Purchasing Cooperative matches the required specifications. And with us this evening, we have Superintendent Landers, if you have any additional questions.
Any questions on the dais? Okay, looks like we're ready to vote. Is it voice vote? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. All right, item 4B, consider resolution awarding bid to Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories Engineering Services, Inc. for replacement generator and line protection relays and engineering support in the amount of $176,034. Do I have a motion? Okay, so moved by Mayor, seconded by Marks. And Ms. Dawkins, do you have a summary? Okay.
So bids were advertised for a replacement generator and line protection relays to be used at the Geneva Generation Facility. 2 bids were received, and only Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories bid on both components. The recommendation, therefore, is to award the bid to SEL. Additional information was contained in your board packet that is available on the city's website. With us this evening, we have Superintendent Holton to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Any questions or comments? No? Okay. Voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, item 4C, consider ordinance restating Title IX Municipal Utilities, Chapter 2 Municipal Electrical Service, Article B, Service Rates and Charges, Section 5, Table of Electric Rates, and Section 13, Net Metering Policy of the Geneva City Code. Do I have a motion? Okay, moved by Marks. A second? Seconded by Mayor. And summarize, please.
So I'm actually going to turn the floor over now to Superintendent Holton and Eric Kam from the Stanley Group. They're going to give you a brief presentation over all of the information that was contained in your packet. And I'll have Officer Parisi turn off the lights for us, please. Thank you.
All right, good evening. Make sure I can find this here. Yeah, I'm gonna need help. While I'm getting help, I do have some handouts here for Eric's part of the presentation. Yeah.
Where do you have it on a flash drive or?
Pete put it on the computer. It's on the transfer drive. I tried selecting it, it didn't come up. It's that one right there. All right. Good evening, everybody. So we're here to talk about our rate study. We did give a presentation back in January, kind of outlining where we were at and where we were going. So I'm going to give a brief kind of update on where we're at since then, and then I'll turn it back over to Eric. Once Eric gives his presentation on the actual rates, then I have a couple slides on the net metering changes. Okay, so where we're at right now. As we mentioned back in January, rates have been stable since 2012. We've not had an increase since then. The average Illinois residential rate and Geneva average customer residential rate remain roughly the same. This is largely due to our long-term stable power contracts. And we like to reiterate and emphasize that this rate increase that we're talking about today has nothing to do with our energy contracts and delivering the energy to the city of Geneva. It is strictly for the needed infrastructure upgrades. Also, the City Council passed the bond resolution in September of 2022. So what are we borrowing this money for? So for both SEMP infrastructure and Geneva Business Park 3. SEMP, if you remember last week, we approved the Couch Road substation contract. We're still working on the feeder design, so there'll be another contract coming along to build out inside the park. Business Park 3 and the Old Kirk Road feeder, we have all the contracts in place to purchase the equipment for GBP 3. We're well underway there. The Old Kirk Road feeder is going to be constructed probably next summer sometime. That will feed into the Fabian and Kirk Road area to feed growth in that part of our system. And finally, one change since we met in January is the Bullock campus, which is on the east side of Kirk Road at Geneva Drive. They are proposing a large corporate and manufacturing campus there, and that will necessitate another substation to be built. So we're up to 3 now, if anybody's keeping track. We're estimating the cost for that is going to be about $5 million. So our original bonding amount was 25, and we've bumped that up to $3 million for Bullock. So if anybody has any questions so far, I'm happy to answer, or I'll turn it over to Eric. Nobody? Okay.
Thank you, Aaron, and good evening, everyone. Happy 4th of July, a little early. My name's Eric Kam. I'm with Stanley Consultants, and I've been working with Aaron and the electrical division on a cost of service and rate study. And we're at a point now where we're ready to recommend some rates, largely based on some of the information we provided back in, was it February, January timeframe? So I'd like to step through this a little bit. Generally speaking, we're going to go through some of the information provided at the last presentation just to give a refresher, give some information on the expenses and update with the Bullock campus, and then kind of run through the guidelines for the rate increases for each rate class, and then actually go through the rate design. Additionally, we've put together some alternative rates for consideration in the future, not necessarily recommended for implementation today, but for discussion purposes and for the electric utility to consider moving forward. So, real quick here, a little background. Utility costs for the municipal utility. You see costs in kind of 3 buckets. The first one are fixed costs. Generally speaking, those are all the costs for your system that do not change with sales of electricity. So the more kilowatt hours you use, the more cost there is in purchase power, but not necessarily administrative and overhead costs. You still have all the equipment and all the personnel. So it's important to recognize that the utility itself has a certain amount of fixed costs that have to be passed on to customers in some way, shape, or form. Next is the distribution demand costs. And generally this represents, and I put up here the size of the pipe that goes to each customer. So larger customers have larger distribution demand costs that are required in order to bring them online. Obviously residential are some of the smaller demand costs because they're pretty consistent across the board, whereas industrial you end up having 3-phase power, large conductor, and large transformers and even substations dedicated to them, so their distribution demand costs go up. The next big bucket, which probably represents about 70 to 75% of your overall costs, are the purchase power demand and energy costs. So these are the costs that basically you buy power to sell back to your customers. So this is a huge portion of your costs, and we need to make sure that as we consider rates, that those rates reflect how you're being billed for your energy yourself. So we see capacity costs specifically, and that's largely based on the PJM contract. So what that is the system, and this will be an issue moving forward. The system as a whole has limited capacity, and so you have to pay for a portion of the capacity on the system to get power to you. Then there's energy costs, which is basically same as a kilowatt hour charge to your customers. You pay a kilowatt hour charge for the energy you're purchasing. I've represented the specific contracts and portfolios that you've got for each of these areas, and kind of a breakout here just at a high level to give some description of what's going on. So you'll see PJM there up in the upper left-hand corner represent a majority of your capacity costs. There are some additional capacity costs in NIMPA, but for the most part, the remainder is generally energy cost. One thing to note there is the Geneva generating facility. While that does look like a small piece of the pie relative to the overall cost, it does play a big role in how you manage your contracts. And so that has helped you maintain a very stable and low energy cost relative to some of your neighbors. So we can, hats off to the utility department for managing that very well, but it does represent a certain portion of your cost. So as we think about how you bill your customers, this is pretty standard. Generally speaking, you've got a customer charge, which is a fixed monthly charge that you see on your bill. It does represent the fixed cost associated with delivering electricity. One thing to note, and you'll kind of see that later in this later in the presentation, it is certainly not equivalent to what the total fixed cost per customer is. That's okay. That's pretty consistent across the industry, but just note that it is not your total fixed cost. Energy charge is a per kilowatt hour. So as we think about this, and I'll talk a little bit about your individual rate structures in the few coming up here, but in some cases, an energy charge, that kilowatt hour charge has to cover fixed cost, the distribution demand that I mentioned, and all purchase power energy costs, potentially. The exception to that is when you include a demand charge, where you're actually able to capture some of the demand costs, whether that's capacity costs from purchase power or distribution demand costs for your system. Including a demand charge is important because it recognizes the actual size of the pipe that has to go to every single customer. So I mentioned we're talking a little bit about rate structure now. You've got two types of rates, and the first one I'll talk about is energy rates, and that represents your residential and general service rates. And basically it's two components. It's a customer charge, which right now for your residential is $6.75, and for your general service is $14, so that monthly that's kind of like your minimum bill. If you use 0 kilowatt hours, you'll still get a $6.75 charge if you're a resident. Then energy charge that you're passing along is the per kilowatt hour that every customer pays, and that has to cover all of the remaining costs to the system. So as you can imagine, it can be a little bit of a challenge depending on how your costs are allocated to make sure that we're covering those costs for that rate class. So that's one of the pieces to rate design as we move forward. The next group of rates are demand rates, which include your medium general service, large general service, large industrial, and time of day rates. These have three components. Like I mentioned before, customer charge, a portion of the fixed cost, energy charge, which is the cost of energy, and it's going to be much closer to your actual energy cost, if you will, or avoided cost, if you will. And then demand charge, which should cover for sure the purchase power demand costs, and then a portion of your distribution demand costs. One thing to note here is that load factor does play a major role for these customers. And a good way to think about load factor is if you have two neighbors and one neighbor has a welder in their garage and they require a three-phase service, but they only run that welder once a month. Well, you had to build out a lot of infrastructure to them, even though they really aren't using that many kilowatt hours relative to that infrastructure. So it's kind of poor usage of the facility. And I say poor, but sometimes that's just a reality of the service. The neighbor next door does not have that, and they have pretty efficient use of electricity, and they utilize their service to its fullest extent, even though they don't have as much or as many energy, as much energy usage as their neighbor. So the reality is in that particular case that the person with the welder and the three-phase service should be paying a greater amount because of what is provided to them. So they need to pay for that demand peak that's built out to them. So demand rates help recover those costs and help recognize those costs for your customers. Oops. Excuse me. So a note on just sales in general. Again, this is kind of representative. You can see the different rate classes here and generally how much you have in sales per rate class. The good news is really that you've got a very balanced system, and that will actually reflect in the rate recommendations moving forward. By having a balanced system, it helps to make sure that you don't have one rate class subsidizing another rate class. Additionally, if you have a change in one rate class, it won't hurt other rate classes. So generally speaking, when we look at different systems, oftentimes you'll see a much larger residential piece, or you may see a much larger industrial piece relative to residential. And oftentimes that makes it very difficult for each rate class to support the whole equally as well. And changes in those rate classes can have a much greater effect to your system. So just the nature of your system is very balanced, which is generally a good thing. You don't have a lot of control over it, but it's a good thing for your system. So we had provided this information in the last presentation, just a little background, kind of our expense outlay for the past 4 calendar years. Nothing significant to write home about here. Obviously, good handling of expenses. A few items of note: the debt service coverage has been going down. I think in 2023 is 0, which is good, and that will change moving forward. Also, you'll notice your purchase power costs have generally trended down, and that's partially due to the amount of sales. We have not been seeing great increases, or actually we've been seeing decreases in kilowatt hour sales over time. Not significantly, but that's part of it. And also just managing your contracts. That's a very good thing. So pretty consistent. And that consistency bears out in your dollars per kilowatt hour that you purchase is about 7.5 cents. Again, been very consistent over the past 4 years. This is just an indicator of kind of noting what is your purchase power cost for the city been, and it has been consistent, which is good. So the next slide here is really what we're looking at and how we're building out this rate study. So there's a few things to note here. We'll talk first about purchase power costs. That's a big unknown at this point. Obviously, you have, I shouldn't say a big unknown, you have a number of contracts that are in place that are helping you hold those, hold your rates. However, with the Geneva generating facility, there is some question on how natural gas will be priced moving forward, and that plays a role in it. So that does have a factor. We do anticipate some growth in that relative to your overall kilowatt hour sales, but generally speaking, very consistent, which is good. I think, generation expense, another one here. We do see a little bit of increase over time, or anticipate some increase over time in the rate study. Again, not a major concern, but we just want to make sure and account for that. Debt service is where you start to see a pretty major change, and that really has to do with the industrial build-out that Aaron had mentioned and that you have all been working on over the past several years. So we do see a pretty big jump in that, not a surprise for the value that we're talking about. Obviously, we're looking at a $30 million bond in the future, and so we need to make sure and cover for that. All things considering, where we see our kilowatt hour sales going, where we see our generation going, and where we see our purchase power costs going, if you project out to 2028, it's about $3.5 million shortfall, which in today's world really is not a surprise. And for sure, this particular approach is pretty conservative. One thing I will note, and I'll probably mention again in the future, is we're not anticipating major industrial growth in kilowatt hour sales in this rate study. And that's because as of right now, there aren't any contracts in place to suggest that that would be the case. So as a result, we're trying to be somewhat conservative in how we move forward, and we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to address this. When we presented last time, we mentioned it would be somewhere between, I think, 10 and 12% increase in revenue requirement moving forward. And as we discussed in the meeting last time, the recommendation from the council was to step that out over time. So as we look at the revenue change over the next 5 years, 5 to 6 years, we're looking at about a 3.5% increase every 2 years. The positive thing about this is if we get out to 2024, we do see obviously a rate increase, which is probably needed to cover some of our costs, especially the debt service coverage. But as we move forward, if we do see large industrial growth, we can reevaluate that and either push off a rate increase or reevaluate the rate study in general to account for the additional kilowatt hours and demand growth in different rate classes, which would be recommended. Additionally, you kind of look at your working capital that you have in place and your purchase power cost adjustment, PCA, and you evaluate whether that stepped increase is necessary. So generally speaking, as we look at the rate case here and look at the rate study, we're anticipating an overall revenue increase requirement out to 2028 of 11.45%. We did increase the debt service coverage due to the $5 million additional cost in the bond issuance, which results in about $300,000 of annual debt service over the course of the study. One thing to note with that is we did apply that specifically to the large industrial rates, as those rates are specifically being benefited by the implementation of the infrastructure going in. Also, we're not really considering any additional sales. Again, we don't have any contracts in place to sell additional power at those rate classes, but we want to make sure that we cover our costs. So really, it's an effort to preserve the viability of the electric utility. I already mentioned we are suggesting step rate increases in 24, 26, and 28, and those will kind of be evaluated based on your PCA and your working capital. Last note here, we did look at residential demand, time of use, and electric vehicle rates, and we'll talk about that towards the end. So, kind of get into the nuts and bolts of where things landed here. As we look at each rate class, what you're going to see in this table is per rate class, the current revenue, what the cost of service recommended revenue would be, and then the change per rate class. So at the end of, as we look at this, we're seeing a need to increase the overall revenue by just under $4 million. Now, you'll note that that was a little different than one of the previous slides where it was about 3.5. What that comes from is that's based off of today's current revenue based on a 2022 sales case. So you actually, instead of the projections, we use actual kilowatt hours sold and actual demand and those kind of things moving forward. So if that were the case moving forward to 2028, you'd actually have to collect a little bit more than what you're collecting today. So we'll step through the individual rate classes. Aaron handed out a packet, and I can step through that as well and kind of explain what that is, but there's some supporting material that Aaron handed out that'll help go through this. So each one of these slides will be very similar. I'll go through the first one here in detail and may step through a little bit quickly on the following ones to keep things moving along. Don't hesitate to stop, ask any questions as we move along. So for the residential rate, you currently have about 8,597 accounts, give or take. This is where, when I was talking about fixed costs, the true customer charge per customer per month is $27.24. Obviously, we are not coming anywhere close to that in collecting $6.50 or the proposed $8 per residential meter, which is not uncommon and not recommended, really. We aren't trying to get to that point. But it's just to note that there is quite a large fixed cost associated with each account, and it's only going to grow with each rate class. You're collecting about $10 million in revenue from this rate class, which represents 26.2% of your total revenue. In the sheet that Aaron handed out, you've got bill comparisons, and you can actually see per kilowatt hour the difference in the bill that would go if we implemented the full rate increase today. So the recommended rate increase to get to 2028, we're going from $6.75 to $8. And then for the energy blocks, we're increasing from 11.2 cents to 13.06 cents. And anything over 500 kilowatt hours, we're going from 10.05 to 10.26 cents per kilowatt hour. The objective here, as I mentioned, we have a guideline, and then we actually design the rates around that. So the guideline for this particular rate class was about $904,850, and we got just under that with this particular rate design. The bottom table there actually shows what our recommended step is for each year. So one of the things that we looked at for this particular rate study was how do we make sure that we're kind of capturing those increased fixed costs over time? And so one of the steps here was to take a immediate customer charge increase for each rate class as much as possible. So we'll do the full $8, and then we adjust the energy charge so that we get approximately equal percentage increases in each one of those steps.
You're on that
Please, absolutely.
screen, how many of our residential customers on 500 and how many go over 500 kilowatts?
So the average, on your sheet, and I was going to bring this up, the average residential usage is 751 kWh. So a majority of your customers go over 500. If you consider this, that the reason for a blocked rate charge like this is to recover additional fixed costs. So as a result, you're collecting an extra $14 in that first block per customer relative to the next, as you move down to the next block, if that makes sense. If you just do the math out for the additional cost for the block. So we're really trying to capture those fixed costs that are significantly more than your customer charge in that first block. That's the real purpose for a block rate like this. It's not uncommon to get rid of that, but, and if you were to do that today, you'd be looking at about 12 cents per kilowatt hour, generally, as the proposed rate.
Now you kind of, so it's 12 cents up there pretty much on the first 500. It drops after the other 5, but you're saying if we really did away with that, everything would be at 12?
Excuse me, so
Okay, that's
in
why I misunderstood
2028,
you. Okay.
in 2028.
All right,
If you
thank
did
you.
away with the block in 2028, it'd be 12 cents. and then
Okay,
we'd-
I misunderstood. That's why I wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you
work
so
up
much.
to there, yep.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, let's let him finish the presentation and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? From the dais, we can ask questions, correct?
Okay. Okay, sure. It's relevant to this slide, I presume?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So, looking at this residential rate adjustment and the sheet that's been handed out, it shows, so your average customer, you said was 751, which falls in the first, 3 tiers of 0, 500, and 1,000 kilowatt hours. Oh, this is general service rate, okay.
Sorry,
so it's here.
the one you're gonna be looking at is the residential rate bill comparison, yep.
It's similar, though, in that
Yep.
the first group of people, users, are getting a higher rate increase than everybody else.
Correct. And that really has to do with the fact that we are increasing the customer charge. So if you look at that at 0 kilowatt hours, we'll just say, an increased customer charge, getting closer, you kind of work your way up to that $27. You're never going to get there, of course, and that's going to continue to increase over time as well. The goal is to collect as many of those fixed costs as is reasonable. So that's really a result of the increased step in customer charge.
And the customer charge and the fixed costs related to the customer charge are infrastructure related, substation, wires,
A&G, any administrative in general, so
so billing people,
Billing
reading
people,
meters,
yep.
all of those things.
all those
So-
things, trucks.
And you segregate that cost so that you can see that that is the actual customer charge, right?
Correct,
So
correct.
it's not just a made-up number, it's actually calculated based on real expenses in a separate category.
Correct, and that's really the $27.24 per customer per month. And which I mentioned, that is not uncommon to have the difference between what your customer charge is and what your true fixed cost per customer is. But again, the recommendation and the rate increase is $1.25 per residential meter per month, and that works your way into those fixed costs to cover those fixed costs.
So do we know what percentage rate would be absorbed by those people that are getting the increased rate cost or the increased customer charge versus the per kilowatt hour increase? How much does that amount to in aggregate?
So, can you, I guess I'm not
So-
sure what you're,
we're going to be increasing the cost at a higher rate to the people that are less users or use less power. Do we know, like, there's a difference between what we're charging now and what we're projecting? How much of that difference is coming from those customers?
I can't tell you that, but we can look at, like, are you looking for zero?
This doesn't seem like good practice to to charge our lower using customers more.
I agree. However, if you look at the overall, so let's take, for example, if someone doesn't have any cost whatsoever, that meter costs $27.24 a month for it to be there. If a customer uses 0 kilowatt hours, you're only collecting $8 for that customer. It doesn't get, if they're using 100 kilowatt hours, which really isn't realistic. I'm not sure what the min and max is. I'm sorry, I don't know that off my top of my head. But you don't actually start meeting the base, requirement for that meter until you're closer to 150 probably kilowatt hours. So at the end of the day, it's a matter of that one. If you're looking at a meter that uses 0 energy whatsoever, at the end of the day, they are not covering the cost for them just to be connected to the system. That's one of the challenges with an energy rate, a pure energy rate, is it's hard to recognize those fixed costs properly and the actual cost that the customer has to the system.
Okay. All right, I understand now, so we can.
Okay. No, that's fine. Perfectly good question.
I just had a quick question. You may have actually answered it, but so just, this is all per month, this entire slide, all of these numbers?
Yes, so, right, so the customer charge would be a per month basis.
Okay.
And then the energy charge is per kilowatt hour that's used.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
And so the numbers on your sheet, the comparison, are a per month basis, yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. On the same sheet here, for the first 500 kilowatts, we're going from 11 to 13, which is 14.5% increase. And then for over 500, it's relatively flat, 2%. Would it make sense to increase that the same?
You can. Really, again, it comes back to how do we make sure that we're covering our fixed costs for the system.
Again, I'm looking at it from an incentivizing savings, and here we're saying, use as much as you want, it won't cost you anything more, so.
That's not necessarily the case because, again, I go back to each residential meter costs $27.24 for it just to be connected to the system. So in order for it to be fair to all people involved, you really want to make sure that everyone's covering their fixed costs appropriately. Again, that's why a block rate energy charge was invented or used. That being said, and as I mentioned before, doing a blended rate, so you just have one rate per kilowatt hour, is also not uncommon at all, and it's perfect and is an option. In this particular case, we looked at how do we make sure that we're covering our fixed cost, and that's really where that differential between the two comes from.
I understand that piece. I guess I'm having trouble seeing why we're increasing residents 14.6%, general service, some of them going up 18%, yet if you use a lot, at the end of this chart, if you're using 3,000 kilowatt hours, your increase is 5%. It seems that when we talked about it in January, everyone was going to share the pain. We were going to increase rates, really, and I thought we talked about 9%. Over the period, and here it is varying based on how much you use.
Anytime there's a structural change to a rate, you are going to see some differences in how it affects customers. Again, I go back to, at the end of the day, there's a fixed cost for every single customer on the system, and how you capture that fixed cost. As we've discussed in our kind of development of these rates, we want to try and make sure that we're capturing those fixed costs so that everyone covers their fixed cost as much as possible, and then beyond that, it's cost of purchase power after that, right? So that's why I mentioned residential, strictly energy rates are hard to capture what the true impact for every single customer is. So we try and work towards building a fixed covering your fixed cost as quickly as we can so that everyone pays the fair amount for their rate. Yeah.
I understand the fixed cost piece. It just seems like it's falling hardest on the people who can't afford it and who are doing their best to use as little power as possible. So I guess I have a philosophical difference with that issue.
Okay, let's
But
finish the presentation and
Yeah.
then we'll hold the questions, sorry.
And we can, and again, we're not making any specific decisions tonight. These are the recommendations, and I appreciate the commentary back. So if we want to make changes to it, we're welcome to do that. All right, so the next rate is the general service rate, and you've got about 1,386 accounts. The true customer charge for this rate is about $40.86, and there's a few reasons for that. Number one, there's some additional A&G associated with these accounts in the billing effort, and also there's fewer accounts relative to the rate class. That plays a little role into it, and also just the infrastructure needed to build out to these rates, these customers. Generally speaking, you're collecting about 2.8 million, which represents about 8.5% of the total revenue that you're collecting. The overall recommendation for the full rate increase goes from $14 to $16 on the customer charge, and then we do an increase on both the first 500 and the over 500 kilowatt hour blocks. The guideline revenue adjustment here is about $272,380, and we got, again, pretty close with this particular rate design. What we're looking for ultimately as we do the rate design is the overall revenue collected per rate class. That's the real objective, is to make sure that we're covering our costs for that rate class. And again, we step out some specific recommendations for the steps 24, 26, and 28, trying to get generally equal increases in revenue. That percentage increase represents revenue for the rate class. The next one is medium service. We have about 170 accounts. So in this particular one, the true customer charge comes out to about $272 per customer. This rate class represents 18.82% of total revenue, or $6.5 million. We're recommending a $5 increase in the customer charge here. This is the first rate that is a demand rate. So we are seeing an increase in demand charge, and this has to do with allocations from demand, from capacity and demand, basically for this rate class based on their kilowatt usage. And then we do see an increase in the energy charge as well. The guideline here was $604,000, and we accomplished about $602,895. And you can see we attempted to collect, recognize the immediate customer charge increase, and then an immediate demand charge increase. Simply, part of that is because we are seeing increases in capacity charges and costs over time. So then we adjust the energy charge moving forward to address the rate increase. Next one is the large general service, 14 accounts. True customer charge here is about $681 a month, and this represents about 16% of your total revenue. We are recommending a $15 customer charge increase for this rate class, and a little larger demand increase to capture some of those distribution demand costs associated with this particular rate class. We are taking an immediate customer charge increase and then stepping up demand and energy over the next 3 years. One thing to note with this rate class and the following two as well is that this is where I mentioned we applied or allocated our additional debt service charges go to these larger rate classes specifically because that build out is for these particular rate classes and going to support these rate classes. I'll also note at this point too, as I mentioned before, if we see significant kilowatt hour sales growth in these classes, it would be a time to reevaluate this as well. So, as we look at this makes some assumptions based on the information we have today, with the hope that the build out of the system would increase kilowatt hour sales moving forward for the whole system. Next one is the large industrial. These are 2 accounts. So this one and the time of day rates are pretty similar in terms of the overall cost to the system. You know, and here you have some large facilities going to these accounts, so the true customer charge is over $1,000. This represents about 7.12%, 7.12% of your total revenue. We are recommending, again, about a $15 increase in customer charge, and a demand charge and energy charge increase to address the overall rate increase for these customers. We are able to get pretty close to the guideline revenue increase for this particular rate class, and we have, you see again, a kind of a bigger step in the first year, partially due to that increased allocation in debt service expense. Finally, the large industrial time of day rate, you've got 5 accounts here. Again, this is another census tied to the large industrial rate, about a little over $1,000 in true customer charge. We are recommending a $10 customer charge increase and a demand increase. I will note that this is, you have an on-peak and an off-peak time period. On-peak is from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Off-peak is from 8:15 p.m. through the morning to the next day, 1:45 p.m. The revenue adjustment as a result of the recommended total rate increase was $1,112,833, and we're just over that at $1,112,918. Again, step through from 24 through 28, similar to industrial. So kind of to round out where we ended up, based on the usage calculated in the test year, the 2022 test year. Kind of as you go down to the bottom, I think the key point is the guideline revenue collection towards 2028 was $38,511,450, which results in a $3,957,000 increase. So we are just slightly over that with our rate design based on the 2022 rate case moving forward. So that gets us to our revenue requirements for the system. Before I move on to kind of the future rates or some considerations there, any questions or?
Sure. Let's go ahead and,
Yes.
yeah, let's go ahead and finish up. We'll start with Alderperson Maladra. And I'm assuming you're going to be going back to the residential rate slide?
Actually, I'm just going to touch on
Okay.
rates in general. So I have a question. I have a question. First question, what is the true customer cost again?
So this
Not
would-
dollar amount, but what is it?
So that would represent if you just looked at the fixed cost for the system.
Right.
So unvariable regardless of how much
Got it.
energy you sell.
Right, so the fixed cost for residential, we said, was $27.24.
Right.
We're raising the customer charge to $8.
Right.
So somehow we're capturing the difference between 27 and 8 within the energy cost.
Correct. That's correct.
So it just seems to me that then if we really want to capture our fixed charge, those who use less are paying more per unit to get up to the fixed charge. So the question for the entire council, as it is every time we talk about rates, how do we intend to capture our fixed costs? If we want to, we can slap a really high fixed customer charge on every bill, but that's going to meet with some pushback. Or we try and finagle it like we did 10 years ago, and 10 years was pretty good.
Yeah, it is.
We
It's very
cannot
good.
talk about this again for another decade. I'm a happy guy. But that is the problem. At the end of the day, we have this fixed component of our utility that we need to cover. If we don't cover it, then the utility weakens because we're not able to maintain what we need to provide service. So every time we kick that can, we weaken the utility. So we have to find the best way to do it. Now, you guys have proposed a way, whether it's best or not, other people are smarter than me. But it does seem to me that with a customer charge component that's set at 8 for everybody, you got to go after the rest of the fixed costs somehow. So that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you. So I have
two questions. One, is it structured this way so after the fixed cost increase, kind of base charge per customer, if we inverted where the rate increase was centered, would we expect usage to go down? I think part of what several of the other alder people are getting at is, so we're in a tricky position because as the managers of the utility, we're responsible for looking after the utility. We're also a policy-making body trying to think about what our energy consumption is, what's responsible, what we want to incentivize, what we want not to incentivize. And I think, and we also want to consider, what burden are we putting on residents who require power. So I guess, sorry, there's a lot of background, but so part of that is driving, why do we structure it this way? I understand we need to make back the fixed cost. Is this the only way to do it? You alluded to a flat rate increase was another way to do that, and I'm curious whether you were planning to present information showing what that would look like. But then in general, what would it look like if we did it the other way? If the increase was lower for the first several 100 kilowatt hours that you used and then higher as you went above it, there's something similar. Now I'm going on a bit long, I apologize. We did something similar with water usage, right? There is, or decided not to do away with part of the structure and how we do that in terms of how sewer costs are figured in order to try to disincentivize people using vast quantities of water. So I guess I'm curious, is there no way to achieve making back our fixed costs and incentivizing reasonable and more efficient power usage, which is the trend and which we are going to keep seeing?
The challenge with an all-energy charge, so I'm going to go back to the residential for just a second. The challenge with an all-energy charge, the reality that you're going to find is that if we're just specifically talking about residential, there aren't a lot of instances where people can make huge adjustments to it. The only way they can adjust their cost is through energy, so using less energy, right? So from my perspective, one of the things you can do, so let's step back and talk about the different rate approaches for residential. One of them is a block rate, which is common, it's been around for a long time. In all reality, many utilities are going away from that and going to a single charge after the customer charge. In this particular case, if we were to make that recommendation today, the 2028 rate would be $8 for the customer charge and 12 cents per kilowatt hour across the board.
So it would actually go up from what you're proposing here?
No, because the first 500
there are a lot
is
of
13.
columns.
The first 500 kilowatt hours right now is 13. Over 500 is 11.
Right, okay.
Okay, so if that were the case, it would just be 12 cents. There would be no blocks. It'd just be 12 cents verbatim across the board. Now, that approach, what ends up happening is that it takes longer to recover your fixed costs. Would you recover your fixed costs? Yes, because we would design a rate to do so. But those customers that don't actually get you to your $27 in fixed costs would not be covering the portion that's just necessary to hook them up to the system, if that makes sense. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we're covering those costs regardless of usage. We're never going to get there. We're not there now, even with this particular rate approach. I would not, and I have not seen an inverted block, and I don't believe that you would find much value in, we actually will talk about some ways to improve, that customers may look to improve usage. And that may actually help the bottom line of the utility as well, but realistically, the ability for folks to really reduce their energy usage in a pure energy rate and their costs in a pure energy rate are pretty limited. You have to upgrade facility, you have to upgrade your air conditioner, your stove and oven if they're electric, your dryer, your washer, your refrigerator. Those are all major energy users in a home. In order to get higher efficiency, you have to spend more money there. So I guess where I'm kind of going with this is that I think that when you look at this, there are limited options for folks, especially for folks that maybe are struggling to cover their energy costs to begin with, to really impact their energy usage and lower their bill, even if we did incentivize that in some way through an inverted rate block.
Can I ask a question, or do I have to still wait?
Does anyone else on the dais have a question? Let me finish up on the dais, and then I'll let you ask your question. Thank you. Alderperson Kasserag?
Let's get my notes here. I think, actually, I'm sorry, I do have more questions, but I'm going to wait till the end of the presentation.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
Oh, she still had the floor, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I've kind of lost the thread of what he was talking about, so I will see if I can kind of try to make that make sense and come back to it. So it's okay. Go ahead.
I'm going to hold my questions till it's done.
Okay. Alderperson Swanson?
I just wanted to make a request. Can you provide us this sheet and the impact if we change the over 500 more commensurate with everyone else?
Yes, absolutely.
And that would be helpful to see, what would the impact of that be? It would be nice to see, what if we had one block, 12 cent, whatever it comes out, and then also, what if we had another block where the over 500 is increasing more than 2% over 6 years?
I'd be happy to provide that. We can
And
do
then
that,
I think we'd have numbers that we can look at and make a informed decision on. So that's just a request for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else on the dais?
I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So on the other, so on the higher usage customer rates, the demand charge, is that a once a month kind of block charge, or is there?
So if you go to your large general service rate comparison sheet, what that is a per KW usage. And we actually have 3 customer examples there, specific for the large general service. And I'm going to scoot forward to that so that way we're seeing the same rates. What you're seeing there is you have a monthly kilowatt hour charge, which is the per kilowatt hour, so we'll say the proposed is 3.5 cents, and then a peak kilowatt demand per customer. So over a month, their demand over time is going to fluctuate. So that's the size of the pipe effectively that they're using. So we look at the peak and charge based on the peak. So each month, for example, for customer 1, in month 1, they had over 344,000 close to kilowatt hours charged. That's times your per kilowatt hour charge on top. And then they had 762 kW kilowatts was their demand peak. And then that's times your $27.75. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so if they use power on peak, they're going to be charged at that rate instead of the.
It is based on their individual peak, not necessarily the system peak, if that makes sense. So it's whatever their peak was for that month. So there's a few ways of billing demand, and some of it's due to the technical abilities of the meters that you have installed. But you can bill based on what's called a coincident peak, so whatever their contribution is to the system peak. So if the system peaks is at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, whatever your demand is, you get charged for that portion. Realistically, sometimes that's hard to determine, and it's also hard to capture in a meter. So typically, what's more common is you just simply see the peak usage for each customer. So in that peak, that also helps us determine, okay, well, this particular customer in this case uses a maximum peak of 1,700 kW over the course of a year. Well, we had to make sure that all the facilities were there for them to be able to draw that amount. That size of the pipe has to be there for them. So we want to make sure we cover that distribution cost as well as the contribution to the purchase demand.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we try and allocate based on the peaks, on the collective peaks, system peaks.
Alderperson Marks?
Could you go back to the residential rates just one more time? Which is probably what you figured where everybody was going to go to anyways. So you're saying if we flip the first 500K with the over 500K, so you flip those numbers, we would just not make the because that's what I think that's what the questions have always been, is we really want to try to have people not use as much power. So would it be that painful for our rate if we flip those two?
Not necessarily, but it would not match the way that your costs are actually, not match the way you're paying for power, number one.
Okay.
And also not match how your costs truly are per customer, if that makes sense. That would be a pretty unconventional rate as well.
Okay.
Very rare to see something like that I've seen.
So they don't start, so we're starting out higher and going lower.
Correct.
But you don't start out lower and go higher to penalize those people who are using more, is what you're saying.
I have never seen a rate that looks like that.
Okay.
I'm sure that somewhere there's one out there. I've never seen
I
one.
think that's what everyone was trying to get at, is,
Yeah.
if we flip those, what would it look like? And you're just saying you just don't see that in the industry then at all.
Right,
Because there's so many people in that first 500
right, exactly.
that you catch most of your, you cover most of your costs right there. In the first
You'd work towards getting down to avoided cost in that first 500, which is something like,
I know what you're saying.
yeah, 2 cents or 3
okay,
cents,
I see
and
what you're
then
saying.
it would be pretty high after that, and, yeah. I've never seen a rate like that, let's put
Okay,
it that way.
just I think that's what everyone was trying to get at, is, help the people who are really trying, that have
Mm-hmm.
bought that new equipment to try to break their rates down, and the people who haven't, move it up. But I see what you're saying, it's just, we just wouldn't recoup the cost quickly enough, is what you're saying either.
Yeah, you wouldn't recoup your costs hardly at all in that first part, and so therefore, the people using less than 500 certainly wouldn't be covering their fixed
Any of their
costs,
cost
any of
base.
their fixed costs, or very little. Whereas then, yeah, you are technically penalizing and trying to encourage less usage. If you want to go that route, my recommendation would be a full blended rate, 12 cents across the board from beginning to end. That makes sense.
And you asked him, right, Alderperson Swanson, to give that, which was fine.
Yep, we can do that.
Okay, and that makes sense, then we could see that.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
very reasonable sensitivity.
Yeah,
to look at.
that makes a little more sense. But is the 751 kilowatt hours average? I mean, I would
Correct.
imagine we really peak in the, the
Yeah.
last couple of weeks, we probably really peaked at the residential usage, I would suspect.
What that truly is that is your total kilowatt hours sold for this rate class divided by the number of customers.
Okay,
On
got
a
it.
per month basis.
Understood. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Alderperson Bowering, did you want to ask another question?
Sorry,
Sorry, was there more to the presentation?
There is.
Okay, why don't we?
Future after this, though.
Yep.
I see.
Yeah.
I guess then, yeah, I have a clarifying question, and please excuse me if this is already clear to everyone else on the council. So right now, we're largely talking about rate increases to fund infrastructure for future customers that we don't yet have contracts with, that we are expecting to have contracts with. But in order to finance those improvements that are underway, we're talking about rate increases for existing customers, which might or might not actually be defrayed by future contracts, but we're trying to say, okay, well, in case nothing ever happens and we build all of this stuff, we will still be able to pay the bond that we got to pay for, to pay for these improvements. Is that correct?
To an effect, yeah, that is correct. But, I mean, there are increasing costs across the board in terms of, we're not sure what gas prices are going to be over the next 8 years, for example. And that's kind of factored into this. We assume kind of not necessarily worst case, but we assume a conservative approach on the impact of that to your system. We also have to assume that there are capital costs associated with improving the system across the board. So it's not completely that. And as I mentioned, we did allocate, for example, the last $300,000 in debt service coverage specifically to the industrial customers classes that would benefit those improvements. But yes, that's part of it. The hope is that the improvements to the system will allow for continued kilowatt hour sales growth for the system, and you could potentially defray this. But looking at the financial forecast today, in order to cover those costs, you are going to have to see increases.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. And if you'll give, Alderperson Kilberg?
Could you review, could you review our contractual arrangements as far as purchase, those contracts that we've entered into as far as purchasing? And I'm trying to recall how far out those go.
I'm actually going to let Aaron answer that
Yeah,
question. If that's
and
okay.
then of
of the 5 years that we're talking about, how far out are we covered here?
Are you talking about our energy purchasing contracts? The NIPA contract runs through 2042.
Right.
Nextera runs through 2030.
Through 23?
2030.
2030?
Right.
Okay.
So the end of this decade is the length of our contract with Nextera.
Okay, those two.
Right.
Okay.
And the landfill generator, we renegotiate every couple of years.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, and I'd like to welcome our guests up to the podium. You've been very patiently waiting.
Mark Schumo, thank you. Sorry to butt in. I had a few questions. Many of them have been answered by other people asking questions, but there were a few. Like many people, I was concerned on this residential slide of the 500 over and under, and it seems like everyone said, it's hurting the people who are conserving and trying to use less, which I think should be a goal, and not hurting or as much the people over. So your thought on the blended sounds interesting to me. The other thought I had was, is there any magic to the 500, 500? Is that, can it be 400, 800? Or I don't know what the, but can you have fun with numbers and slice it and dice it in ways that could show different results? Likewise, would there be any difference? Is there any magic in the $1.25 customer charge? Or what if it was $1.50 customer charge? I mean, there's a lot of things, you can tweak numbers and see how it plays out. So that's some of my thinking on this. And again, I understand that the idea here is to pay for the infrastructure, and that's something that must be done. But I don't think we should lose sight of a bigger picture, of a future that we may want to go to and improve. And I think energy efficiency and conservation and usage reduction is the future. Now, I don't know, these fine young men did a very wonderful job of doing all this, and they weren't tasked with that question. So I understand that's not on the table. But I think that we as a community should bear those thoughts in mind when we're making these decisions, because the decisions that you're making may impact how you treat and view the future. The other item that occurred to me when you were talking about this had to do with how I've heard, especially in this day and age of grids being overused in certain regions of the country, not being able to meet their demands, that there are programs, and I don't know how that works, but I know these gentlemen in the business would have some idea of that. There's like people can be incented to say, like, you can save money on a hot day if you turn down your air conditioning during the peak hours. Or, are there opportunities to mitigate some of these impacts using those kinds of strategies? And again, I fully recognize that wasn't what you were tasked with, but those are kind of outside the box thinking that may impact not just the discussion today, but future needs. So thank you for letting me interrupt and ask your question.
Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wanted to make one thing, comment about the infrastructure. I think that we all need to understand that what we're talking about is something, we all expect that even if we only use the lights for 1 hour a month, we expect the lights to come on when we turn the switch on. So we're talking about being able to pay for the mechanisms or the infrastructure that enables us to do that. And in reality, I think that whether we are people, living at home consuming less, with high efficiency appliances and things like that, or we're energy hogs with wasteful appliances, that infrastructure cost is still the same to both of us. And what we're really talking about is trying to find a way to make it different for people who use less and more for people who use more. But in reality, the need, the expectation that this stuff works when you hit the switch is the same for all of us. That's all.
Well, yeah, I appreciate my alderman, Mr. Maladra, and I appreciate that. No, two august alder people, and I do appreciate, and we truly do recognize that need, and I think Mr. Maladra himself asked, are these the only ways to slice and dice it? And looking for the best way.
All right. Sorry, we need you at the podium so your voice can be heard by the millions watching. But let's go ahead with Alderperson Bruno.
Thank you. I don't know if now's an appropriate time to mention it, and correct me if I'm wrong. If we distill everything down, everyone just pays their fixed costs, and there's just a flat usage rate, that ends up being regressive, does it not, for the
Oh, yeah.
lower end? And it gets uncompetitive for our
Yes.
industrial users. That's what makes this all really complicated.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
because we need to attract these big users for a myriad of benefits. So, and we don't want to be regressive. So, just needs to be said, I think. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for the comments. Great conversation. Let's continue the presentation.
So just a note here. I can put together a sensitivity on these items. That's fairly simple to do, and we can kind of present that or provide that to the council, so you can kind of consider what the different options are and see the impacts of that. That's not too hard. But actually, the questions that you brought up transfer us into the next section perfectly. So there are some considerations for different rate approaches for your residential, specifically residential. So looking at your rate class, residential rate class, you can do a demand rate. You can implement a demand rate. And what that means is that instead of just doing a pure energy charge, now you have multiple ways to reduce your bill. You can reduce the amount of demand. So for example, if your air conditioner, you come home, and I'll use it because it's going to be pertinent in a few minutes, but if you come home with your electric vehicle and you plug it in and then you turn on your air conditioner and then you stand at your refrigerator and it starts running, suddenly your demand goes up for your house, right? The amount of energy you need at that moment goes up. If you can avoid doing that and find ways of reducing that, you can, using a demand charge for residential, you can reduce costs. So we worked a little bit on putting together kind of a, I'll call it a proposed rate, but it's kind of I'll call it an experimental rate, a consideration rate. So a residential demand rate would look something like this, where you'd be charged $8 a month, $10 for your peak KW, which for most residents is somewhere between 2 and 5 KW typically, and then an energy charge, which is under 10 cents. So what you see there is that those customers who do have those high efficiency appliances and things like that that reduce their demand, it helps them. And also those who are considerate about when and how they use their energy, it helps them. It also reflects better what your energy costs are, namely the demand and then the energy and the fixed costs. So you're able to better recoup relative to how your costs are set up. So this is an option to consider. Another one is a time of use rate for your residents. So we actually did an evaluation of your demand curve for your system. And the objective here was to say, okay, well, to discourage use during the peak times, which for your system are between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and actually a little after 11 o'clock at night. There was some consideration given here to electric vehicles specifically. We want to make sure that there's enough time to charge between the off-peak and when you go to, or on-peak and when you go to work. But your peak occurs in the afternoon. So charging customers more during that time will encourage people to use their energy a little differently. So for example, I personally was put on a time of use rate. I had a house with a pool at one time, which is a terrible decision, but I had a house with a pool, and the first thing I did was I went out and I bought a timer for my pool pump. I also bought a smart meter, or a smart thermostat, right? And so we turned off the air conditioner between 4 and 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever time that was. The pool timer stayed, the air conditioner came back on. And that's kind of what happened in our house. But the point being is that this actually does give your residential customers specifically a way to help reduce cost and curb your capacity cost to your system. So we hope to see some reduction. Now, I mentioned here, you assume customers reduce their peak demand by 12%. We can play with that as well and look at some other examples, but that's kind of the, as we talked about and looked at the opportunity there, that's probably a reasonable approximation. And what that does is it reduces the demand costs allocated to this customer class. That's why I mentioned that. The other objective with this particular rate is that it would be revenue neutral. So you'd collect the same amount, but it would give customers more options. So just something to consider. The last one to talk about here is an EV rate. So for electric vehicles in many ways can be very good for the system. One of the things from my perspective is if they're charged at the right time, you can take advantage of your electric infrastructure that's not being used. And so you can still collect revenue on facilities that would otherwise be dark, right? So in this particular case, we actually look at kind of a three-step rate. So you have an on-peak and an off-peak like before. The on-peak occurs between 4 o'clock and 10 o'clock, which coincides with the previous rate I discussed. The off-peak is between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. And again, part of the timing of that has to do with, well, I need to be able to charge my car for the next morning to drive to work. Then the shoulder would be 8 to 4, which would just be the normal cost of energy, which I mentioned before is kind of the blended rate of 12 cents. So you're just going to pay normal costs. One thing to note here is there is an additional $3 customer charge here. And that has to do with the fact that there is going to need to be some sort of additional infrastructure for a meter or something put in place in order to take advantage of this rate. But it opens up people to a 4.5 cent charging rate for their EVs. So it has to be metered specifically for that. Someone has to opt into it. But it is something to consider and just thought-provoking as EVs are expanded, and it gives folks the option and maybe makes it more competitive for them to have EVs, which allows you still during the off-peak time to collect some margin in revenue off of your system to help support the system as a whole. So those are some considerations. Some considerations for future rates. Again, I'm not recommending these be implemented tomorrow or in the next rate increase, but at least you can kind of see some different options there. So I appreciate you bringing those things forward because there are options. And with regard to the 500 kW breakpoint, you see that at different levels. I think it used to be set kind of at the average usage. Well, that's crept up over time. So there could be an argument that that should be moved up. At this time, I don't think, especially considering a pretty significant rate increase in discussion right now, I don't know that you want to chase after too much structural change to the rates beyond what we're proposing today. But that's certainly an option to look at that break point and what that would look like moving forward. If you move it closer to the average, you would simply build in the additional fixed charges in that first block, and then everyone else would be the basically their marginal cost after that. So, any questions on these rates? Otherwise, I will be turning it back over to Aaron for a moment.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, I think this is pretty interesting because of some of the discussions that we had around our actual costs for the energy purchasing. And I think that Aaron showed us graphs before that show on peak, you know, where we have to use the peaker plant and we have to use, we have to buy energy on the market on those days. So this also aligns then with a better discount rate if people were to use solar, because it aligns with when solar would be beneficial to a user, which would be during that late afternoon, during the sunlight hours, and when air conditioning and all of these other electrical users are on. But it seems like very complicated to enact this kind of thing. Do our current meters even allow this?
So, well, the current residential meters do not. We would have to purchase
All new
specific meters to do this. I specifically asked Eric to look at this, and we worked on this in anticipation of electrification. You know, we know this is coming, right?
Right.
People, you're seeing the Rivians and the Bolts and the Teslas driving around town. We know people in town have electric cars. Right now, they're just charging them. And we don't, you know, there's no price signal for when we want them to charge. And so we came up with kind of these three options. And what we want to do, well, we wanted to present them, so get them in front of you, so you're somewhat familiar with them. And we want to kind of game this out. We want to look at our users, because we have that data, and we can start plugging this in, and we can kind of see what works best. The least painless one is going to be the time of use rate, I think. The EV rate, we're going to be asking people to put in, most likely we're going to be asking people to put in separate meter bases along with the EV chargers. There's going to be an increased cost with that. That's not going to be very popular, I don't think. There is emerging meter technologies that might bring that down, but they're somewhat nascent right now. This residential demand rate is kind of in between the two of them. Takes a lot of, this one will take the most education with the consumers.
When I could see people getting burned on this.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I can
having a real bad day.
anticipate the phone calls.
Yeah, it would be a bad
with this
day.
one.
I've also seen where there is a time of use demand rate, so you would implement the demand rate during that 4 to 11 o'clock at night, so you're only looking at demand during that time, which might help. But to your point, educating your customers is going to be super critical with this. Normally, there's probably about a year-long campaign, if you will, to provide information on billing and what that would look like, and so that your customers actually start seeing demands on their bills and understanding how that will play. So it's not something, certainly not something you want to implement tomorrow, but it is a consideration that would give, especially residential and single-phase general service customers, some more options for how they manage their energy.
Tag team, my turn
Yep,
again.
you're up.
The other aspect of this I had in mind, these would be opt-in rates. So if somebody wanted to do this, we would make it available to them. It wouldn't be as of January 1, everybody's going to a demand rate.
Yeah, we could try it out.
Right.
Kick the
You
tires
know,
a little bit.
and if it's popular and word of mouth, and, you know, we see it going in a certain direction, then we can kind of make those decisions. But these would definitely be opt-in type of rates if we do implement them.
And Alderperson Kosterog?
Thank you. This has been a great discussion. I think there's going to be a lot more. We're missing an alderperson here that I think would like to be really involved in this. There's no way we're going to settle this tonight. So I'd like to make a motion to postpone this discussion to a date certain. I'm open to that from the city administrator.
If we could at the moment, though, there's still more to the presentation.
I thought we were done with the presentation. That's what I was waiting for.
So, I don't disagree, and I think everybody agrees. So I think once the presentation's over, then we can talk about what the next steps would be.
Okay.
And Alderperson Bowering?
Sorry, before we move on, I don't at all understand the demand rate structure. It's possible that we can take this up at another date, since we will certainly keep talking about it, but just for what it's worth, I'm completely lost.
So a customer's demand is their peak usage during the month for a 30-minute period.
Can we go to that slide, though? I feel like I understand the residential EV rate and even the time of use rate, but this one, okay, sorry, so looking at- yeah, go ahead.
There's a difference. So kilowatt hours is energy over time. So we charge kilowatt hours over a month, okay? Kilowatts is just a unit of measurement, if you want to think of it that way. So a KW demand charge would just be your peak demand for 30 minutes. whereas your kilowatt hours is all the energy you use from the first of the month to the last of the month.
How does that line up with these charges? The customer charge, I understand, that's like a base charge. Then there's a demand charge. Is that also just a flat rate charge?
Now, that would be.
That's an example charge.
So if you, like Eric said, if you plugged in your electric vehicle and turned on your air conditioner and opened your refrigerator, suddenly you're drawing, I'm going to use 15 kW off the system for that 30 minutes, okay? Then you close your refrigerator, turn your air conditioner down, and you go out to lunch or go out to dinner in your car. Suddenly your demand would go down to 5 kW. You would get billed that 15 kW at that $10 rate. So that peak usage for the month is what you would get billed.
I see.
And then you
That's
would
the
also
rate
pay for the energy that you use throughout the month as well. Like
all at this lower rate.
Right.
I see.
That's what we said. There's a lot of,
Yep, I
on
see
this
why-
one
I
in
see why
particular,
I see why there's a
there's
steep
a
learning
lot of
curve.
education.
Gotcha.
Don't,
But thank you. I now actually
Yeah.
understand what this rate structure means, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay. All right, any other questions from the dais before we go on? Oh, Alderperson Bruno?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The, quick question. The off-peak, peak, shoulder times, for the energy on that slide, our current meters can,
No.
No.
Not the current residential meters. We have meters on the system that can do that, but not the ones that are currently installed on residential houses.
and that's the largest number of meters that we.
Right.
And the software behind it, our billing software, that's,
I'm gonna nod yes and look back at Rita. It can handle the on-peak, off-peak.
Okay.
Whether it can handle the on-peak, off-peak in the shoulder, we'd probably have to do a little bit of research.
thanks.
Okay?
Okay, I think we're ready to return to the
All right,
presentation.
we're gonna dive into solar rates now. Okay, so solar metering. Currently, City of Geneva offers a net metering rate. What we do is we meter energy only on this rate. The example I like to use when I'm talking to customers who are considering it is, let's say you have a PV unit that generates 20 kW or 20 kilowatt hours a month, and you use 10 kilowatt hours a month. So at the end of the month, you would end up with a credit of 10 kilowatt hours. 10 minus, or 20 minus 10 is 10. That energy gets banked, so it gets tracked by the city. And let's say the next month it flips. You use 20 kW, but your PV system only puts out 10. What we would do is the city would take that banked, that netted 10 kW and apply it to the bill to make up for the shortfall between what your PV system used and or the PV system generated and what you use in your house. And we've had that now for, it's been in the city code for quite some time. I think 2010 is when that first went in. Obviously, it's an incentive for PV usage or PV installation. We don't disagree with that fact. The big issue is that since we're looking at kilowatt hours, that's essentially a retail rate. So we just got done discussing fixed costs and variable costs within the electric rate. So those credits that build up and that are used are deferring those fixed costs to run the utility system. Okay? That's part of the issue. The other part of the issue is our utility billing system cannot handle this type of net metering arrangement. We have worked exhaustively with New World, trying to figure out a way to make this work. There was a glimmer of hope a couple years ago. They said, yeah, we've got a utility out in California that's done this. And 3 or 4 weeks went by and they came back and said, no, they did that about 10 years ago and we got rid of the functionality and it will not be coming back. We asked pretty please how much would it cost. And they said, no, we're not going to, it's too difficult and it's not what the system's built for. So in light of that, our utility billing specialist every month, as our interconnected customers come up to bill, They physically read the meter. Either we have to send a truck out to read the meter, or we read that over our fixed network. And that data goes into a spreadsheet, is compared to the month before. If it's a credit, the credit is carried over. If it's usage, then the credit's applied, and then a bill is generated, and then we kind of fake out the billing system to put an amount in there so it comes out on the bill correctly. The downside of that is our interconnected customers can't see what their credits are. It doesn't show up on the bill. All it shows up on the bill is, if they have a credit, is a zero amount due for the electric usage. There's a lot of work and hours that goes into doing that. Obviously, it's done by hand, so there's an opportunity for errors. We've had errors that we've had to sort out. So for these customers, we end up spending significantly more time than we do for our normal residential. So one way that we would like to address those issues is to transition to an avoided cost model for net metering. So the avoided cost operates around the idea that a kilowatt hour of energy that we receive from an interconnected customer is a kilowatt hour of energy that we don't have to buy off the market. So we can determine that price, and then we can give that PV customer credit for that energy delivered at that price that we would normally pay off the market. Now, it still isn't perfect, still doesn't solve all the issues we had before, but it alleviates the part of the issue of not being able to collect some of those fixed costs. The other advantage is the utility billing system will work. So now these customers can be more, as far as utility billing and on the finance side, they can be handled more like just a regular residential customer. The meter readings, the delivered and received meter readings come into the billing system. It does the math and calculates whether there's a credit coming or there's a charge coming, with no interference or input from our utility billing personnel. So that's kind of, let's see, I bumped the thing. So this avoided cost, we propose to calculate it annually. We're going to use the local marginal price, call it LMP. That is the price that we pay both in day-ahead and real-time markets for the energy we use. Now, we talked earlier about our energy contracts. So we have fixed cost energy contracts with several different entities. Without getting too far in the weeds here, on a daily basis, we take that energy that we contractually receive, we sell that into the market, and the market pays us for that energy. And then we buy what we need back out of the market. And then there's a difference between that, and that depends on whether we have a margin or a deficit for that transaction, okay? That's the LMP. So there were several questions on the formula on how we come up with the avoided cost. I got looking at it a little bit closer. It is very confusing. It took me a second to kind of look at it again and figure it out. I am going to present something that's more coherent and makes a little bit more sense. There's a different way we can kind of present it. But essentially what we do is we take a model PV system. We model this over a year. We align that with our LMPs and we get a value. And then we take that value of the electricity generated, divided by the kilowatt hours that's been generated, and that gives us our avoided costs. So that's how we come up with that. So I've kind of covered the why. The other point here is the industry is starting to transition away from just a pure net metering. The CEJA legislation allows this. One other point with CEJA, so we are not allowed to adjust like a fixed cost for an interconnected customer. We have to treat them just like we do any other residential customer. So we couldn't charge the PV customers $20 a month to account for all the hands-on type of billing activities. We're not allowed to do that. They pay the same $8 or $6.75, as the case may be, as everybody else. Our surrounding communities, St. Charles, Batavia, Rochelle, all have moved to a avoided cost type model. Rochelle and St. Charles have started in last year in March of '22. They're grandfathering their existing customers for 10 years. Batavia is taking a different tack on that. They're grandfathering their customers for 5 years, and they're putting in place the avoided costs, but then they're putting an adjustment factor on it that tapers over those 5 years. So after 5 years, everybody's paying the avoided costs. So what about our existing metering customers? We realize that people have invested money in these type of PV systems, in interconnections. We arrived at 7 years as kind of a compromise of getting people onto the avoided cost rate, but still giving the existing customers consideration for their investment. An existing net metering customer, if they looked at the avoided cost model and said, you know what, that's going to work better for me than the way it's happening now, they could transition over at any time. All we ask is for some written notice. And also, if a customer leaves, the customer sells their house, disconnects the service, the buyer and the new customer would automatically go on to the avoided costs. And finally, any new PV installations after August 1 is what we're proposing, would go to the avoided cost model. To give you an idea, so far this year, we've had 2 completed interconnection agreements. I've got 2 pending interconnection agreements. So we have seen a sharp drop-off in the last couple of years. We saw a lot of activity in the late teens and early 2000s, but in the last 2 years, it's really gotten flat on PV installations. And here's a couple examples. And this is strictly for the electric parts of the bill. This doesn't include water, sanitation, and so on and so forth. Customer number 1, and this is a high-producing PV system. They don't draw a lot from the utility system, but they generate a lot of electricity back from their PV unit. I don't know, we don't have any insight on how people use their energy. So, as the case may be, this particular account on this month pushed back about 1,000 kilowatt hours to us. We delivered to them about 82, which is pretty good. So total charges for the delivered, that would be at the retail rate, would be $9.89. We would give them we would received $70.21. So if we take delivered minus received, the billed amount would be $60.32 credit on their bill. So you compare that to the current rate, they would end up with a 987 kilowatt hour credit, and all they would see would be a 0 on their bill. On the other end of the spectrum, we have an interconnected customer that has high energy consumption. And we don't know, again, we don't know why that is. We can't see into the house. We don't know what's really being used. In this particular month, this customer drew 888 kilowatt hours off of the system, and we received back from them 174 from their PV system. So again, $98.93 would be their charges for delivered, and $11.46 for the received. We do the math, comes out to $87.46. Compared to the current rate, they would see a difference of about $6. So they would get billed on the current rate at $713 kilowatt hours, and then pay $81.42 for the electric. So that is the end of my presentation for that. And
for this example, do you
Yes.
have a before and after for both those customers? That's the important piece.
I do not. These are existing interconnected customers, have been for a number of years. So I don't have a before and after for these particular
So could you produce that? Net
I could-
metering would be this for this month, and then the proposed changes for the reduced rate would be this. And then we can see, okay, for these two examples, what is the impact?
Okay, so I don't think, I'm sorry, Alderman, or Alderperson Swanson, I'm not clear on what you're asking. So the numbers that we used here are the proposed rates?
Right.
Okay, so, and you're asking, you want to see what it looks like on our existing rates?
Yep, net metering.
Okay.
You got it. What's the
I
change?
got you.
What happened to both
Yeah,
those
I can
accounts?
provide that,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, you said before and after. I was thinking before the unit was in and then after it was installed, so.
Yes, two different scenarios.
Okay.
Thank you. And Alderperson Mayor, did you still have a question? Okay.
Okay.
And Alderperson Bowring?
Yeah, so in addition, I'd be curious to see this played out for a year. I know talking to customer residents that have solar, because the credit stays on their account for, I believe, the fiscal year.
Yes.
They often wind up using it, not in the month that they produce it, but then when their consumption, or, their production
Right.
goes down. So I feel like that might be either in addition to or instead of a monthly comparison might be useful, just because it does go up and down.
Yes, we should be able to do that. We can do a
But then,
couple.
actually, I was going to suggest that we come back to Alderperson Kosarug's suggestion to continue this to a date certain, or I'm not sure what the
So
proper procedure is.
I would like, before we have a motion to date certain, that we have a short discussion of what we're looking for and what we're bringing back, and whether we want that to be at a special committee of the whole meeting, so the night is dedicated to that, if it can be tagged on to a regular committee of the whole, kind of all of those things, rather than just quickly making a motion to a date certain. I think it would be more beneficial, not only so that we get feedback from our consultant and our staff as to timing and those kinds of things as well. So I'm happy to.
So do we have to solve the whole problem at once, or can we defer some of the solar discussion to a later date and adjust the rates as a separate
Yes.
vote?
Yes. The most important aspect of this whole exercise is getting the new rates in place so we can bond. We have to have the rates in place before we can go for the bonds, and that's really driving this. So the solar discussion can happen at a separate time as well.
Okay, so I still have questions about the rates themselves and would like to probably have a discussion, another discussion about that when our other alderperson can be present.
I mean, so and this is, again, assuming you all can be ready, I mean, we can schedule it for the next cow, which is July 17th, if you're both available, not available? That's fine.
I'll be his Boy Scout
Yeah,
camp.
that-
And I won't be here either.
That's why I want to,
Yeah, I won't be
I want to
here for
ask
that.
these, you're not here on the 17th?
No.
I don't have that on my list. I don't have that on my list. Again, or we can pick, the second or a fourth Monday. I mean, again, it's clearly something important that everybody wants to be here, but at the same time, we're somewhat under a time crunch, given when we pass the resolution to bond, we have so much time to go out to bond and doing all of that, and all of the work it takes on the back end to get the new rates into place and that, so.
I think we should have a special on the 2nd or the 4th, because it seemed like there's a lot of questions still out there, and I think rather than rush it, I would rather see it have a whole evening just for it.
And
That would be my-
we do have a fifth Monday in July, so.
And that's fine too, if they can be, I mean.
24th would work.
So we have the 24th, but I think Mark's indicated you may not be available on the 24th.
Let me get back to you on that, it may flip, but yes, I may be able to be here on the 24th of July?
Of July.
Yeah, okay, let me get back to you on that one for sure.
I will
And
not
I
be,
don't- I guess
I will
there's a-
not be here on the 31st.
Not the 31st, but the 24th?
The 24th, yes.
And Eric, the 24th?
I believe that, yes, I can be here for that.
The 24th, I'm not here.
You're not, I thought you're not here the 17th.
Ms.
You're right,
Dawkins and,
you're right. I'm not here the 17th.
Ms. Dawkins and
24th is good.
Chairperson Ruby, we can also have a special committee of the whole meeting on any night of the week.
That is true.
So perhaps we should have Ms. Fernari or yourself send out an email blast with
Okay,
several dates
and we
suggested.
could do that. We'll get some dates. What I would say to having it a different night than Monday is that we have lots of meetings that take place in this space. And so it's just a juggling factor to move other people to other spaces.
How do we make the motion? If
I
thought the
don't,
dates-
you don't need a motion.
Oh, we don't need a motion. I
This
thought
is
we
a
had to
committee
do a
of the
date.
whole. There was a recommendation, but we don't need a motion. We will bring it back when we find a date that works
Perfect.
for everybody.
No action taken.
No action to be taken tonight.
I have two people waiting to speak. Actually, Alderperson Bowering still has the floor. I didn't lose track of it that time. Good? Okay, and Alderperson Kilberg. Dean, do you have a question?
I thought
or-
she was speaking.
She's done.
Oh.
Thank you.
What is the projected implementation date? Obviously, you have in the back of your mind a target date to move forward with this. I think when we talked about it in January, you said the fall. Is that still the?
Yeah, in the proposed ordinance, we have putting the new rates in place in November.
November?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have time.
Yes.
The other thing is that, you know, there's a lot of minutia involved with this. I think the reality of it is I don't think that the typical residential user that's using around 700 kilowatts a month is probably going to be all that fascinated with the detail. I think what they're going to do is they're going to look at the number and see what the increase is. And I think the important thing, I think, also is that when we get pushback, a lot of times it's a comparison to our neighbors. So could you provide us with a projection of what it would look like over a 3-year period for a 700 kilowatt user per month, what their electrical utility costs would be compared to Batavia and St. Charles?
Yeah, we can provide that.
I mean, that would be,
I don't know if I can do it for a 3-year,
okay.
but.
Whatever you can do.
I can provide a comparison to.
Yeah, I think
everybody in
that
Fox
would
Valley.
be helpful, because that gives us an opportunity to not only get into the minutia if we need to, but also the reality of what's happening and the level of increase that we're seeing compared to our neighbors. And, you know, I think as it related to water and sewer, I think we look very favorable. And I guess I would like to see a like comparison as it relates to what we're talking about here over the last hour and a half.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great.
So, to Stephanie's point, we do need some direction on what we're looking at for the rates. So.
Yeah, so when we come back, I know there was a question to compare. There was providing the impact if we use different methodologies. Alderperson Swanson, you were?
Increasing the over 500 kilowatt hours
Okay.
for residential and general service.
And beyond that, are we looking at?
I did have one thing that I think is pertinent to what I'd like to see. So I understand why we don't charge the full amount of the user charge for residential. But when we get down to like 14 users in a category, why aren't we charging them the actual cost to deliver service as a base charge?
That really comes down to competitiveness.
Yeah.
Our fixed charges are commensurate with other people in the Fox Valley. And if we had a large fixed charge, it would not make us as attractive.
Okay. And as it pertains to new developments, you know, when we open a service account in my work with, let's use Peoples as an example instead of ComEd, they have a recapitalization of their upfront cost schedule that basically shows like a projected, when that investment in their business has been recapitalized by Peoples. And we've had to pay a deposit, customers have to pay a deposit up front on that amount. And then once you reach that usage, it gets discounted back to you. Do we ever, the example of somebody who has a device in their building that they use once a month that is their peak usage device, and we have to build the infrastructure to that location for that device, but their usage doesn't pay for the infrastructural investment. Do we charge for the full amount of the amount it costs to bring electricity to a building?
We do.
So upfront,
As
we
part of-
have an
as-
install charge.
As part of any new construction, the developer or whoever's doing the construction is responsible for bringing the electrical infrastructure to the building.
So in the case of where we need a new substation for the development going in, they're going to pay that?
Typically, the substations are paid for by the city because they can be utilized. I can tie a substation to, the load across Kirk Road and feed that. So typically, the city pays for the substation. Anything outside the fence is paid for by the customers. Didn't used to be that way. It used to be similar to what you're talking about.
Right.
They made that change 20, 25 years ago, quite a while ago. That way the growth pays for itself.
Okay. That's all I have then. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're
Okay?
good, and we can always watch the tape, double check.
All right. Thank you, Aaron and Eric. Okay, any last questions or comments for tonight on this? Okay. All right, this brings us to public comment or new business. Anything?
Closed.
Oh, no, there's no vote.
There's nothing.
No.
No.
There was just a motion. Okay.
No. Public comment, new business, anyone?
Chairperson Ruby, under new business,
Yes.
I'd like to recommend, and I suspect that this will be without any objection, that we postpone our special committee of the whole meeting scheduled tonight, and we host it next Monday night. There's no formal vote needed, just, yeah.
Approved.
So to clarify, that'll be next Monday, July 10th.
Okay, and then to clarify, you're sending out dates for a special cow?
For either, we'll look at what's coming before the cows, if there's a light agenda, or a special cow, or another night, but we will send out some dates to all of the alderpersons once I get with staff and Eric to make sure that we all can be present.
Okay. All right, then go ahead.
Were we scheduled to meet on the 10th? Or do we have a council or committee of the whole meeting already scheduled?
No,
Okay, so this will be
this will
An
be a special
additional-
committee of the whole on, yes.
just this topic. What do you project?
We were supposed to have a special committee of the whole meeting
Right.
following this.
Yeah, I
We
got
are moving that meeting to next Monday.
But that'll be the only meeting.
That'll be the only meeting.
Yes, there won't be a
Okay.
cow and a council, is that what
What
you're
do you
asking?
project is, how much time will we need for this evening? I mean, you have to have a little bit of an idea. I'm just saying,
No, I don't.
oh,
It depends on the council, so I have no idea. I mean, an hour
yeah.
to give it good time? I mean, I think it's kind of an organic conversation usually,
No,
so.
okay, I got a conflict for next Monday night and would like to attend, but I didn't realize that we were going to have this, that we're going to,
And I would just say that that was one of the dates I threw out earlier this summer, trying to get
well, yeah.
information, so.
Well, this changed too.
Again, I think if we try to accommodate everyone's schedule for every single possible meeting, I have a feeling we're
well,
gonna, and
I'd be in
I
favor-
understand, certainly.
I'd be in favor of that we continue this evening if we could. rather than to come back next Monday night.
Well, that's up to the council.
Next week.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Sorry, Dean.
Guys have enough
Okay,
tonight.
I think we are ready for a motion to adjourn.
Well,
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Celebrate.
Do I hit this again?